and see this unique and fascinating place called Hollywood.
The greatest secret in Hollywood had nothing to do with scandals or affairs. It had to do with height. Studios misled the American public about their top actors for decades, constructed pits on filming locations. Shorter actresses were employed. Every 6 months, they even covered the cost of special elevator shoes. Just drilling holes cost one studio more than $100,000 to make their celebrity appear taller. Another had agreements that required co-stars to be less than a specific height. The general public was unaware. How then did they trick everybody? Let's begin. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney's height was a mere 5 feet 2 inches. He was the shortest leading man in all of vintage Hollywood as a result. However, he was larger than Gary Cooper and Clark Gable for 3 consecutive years, in 1939, 1940, and 1941, as well as Cary Grant. Out of all of them, he earned the most money for MGM. His little stature enabled him to portray Andy Hardy, an adolescent kid. Audiences adored those stories even when he was already in his mid-20s. In the series, they produced 16 pictures. Additionally, they made about $1.9 billion if you include earnings in today's currency. Mickey's body never appeared mature. His energy was wild and his face was childish. Because of that combination, he became the symbol of hope in America throughout the Great Depression. When people saw him, they felt somewhat better, but later on, the thing that made him famous nearly ruined him. Mickey returned from World War II wearing a bronze star on his chest. He was now in the military, but Hollywood had no idea how to handle him. Appeared too little to portray a fully grown man, even though he was no longer a child. Casting directors began repeatedly penning the same line. 2 words, difficulty with height. Scenes of romance grew bizarre. He once made the joke that in order to kiss his co-stars, he had to stand on a box. His weekly compensation of $5,000 was reduced. Studios ceased phoning. By 1950, he was making far less money from low-budget crime movies when an unexpected event occurred. He portrayed a battered fight instructor in one movie and a broken boxing teacher in another. He received Oscar nods for both roles. His diminutive stature no longer seemed absurd. It appeared authentic. It appeared difficult. Then everything changed once more in 1979. Mickey got a new part from Francis Ford Coppola. In the film The Black Stallion, he portrayed a retired jockey. He was just the right size this time. Jockeys needed to be tiny. He received another Oscar nomination. The film earned $40 million, and he was praised by reviewers. He demonstrated once more that he was uncountable. Before turning 25, he had already acted in 43 movies. Decades later, he continued to astound people. Despite being barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, Sammy Davis Jr. exuded confidence on stage. 1925 was his birth year. Into a performing family. He was already dancing with the Will Maston Trio on stage when he was 3 years old. Somehow, his tiny shoes, which had been polished to a mirror sheen, always landed precisely on time. The audience seemed incredulous. Nightclubs did not want to hire him in the 1940s. He was short, dark, and quite youthful. In a horrific vehicle accident later on, he would also lose one of his eyes. Sammy didn't care if he didn't look like a celebrity in the eyes of many. He used every argument against him as justification to give a louder clap. He was capable of everything. Like Gene Krupa, he would play the drums. After that, he would start singing like Frank Sinatra. He would then dance so quickly that it was impossible to follow him. And he didn't run away when people began to notice how tall he was. He included that in the joke. I'm a Negro Jew with one eye. He would also add that I'm short. The crowd would erupt in laughter. Then, he would use a song like Of the Blues to hush them. Producers were still concerned when he was chosen for the Broadway production of Golden Boy in 1964. Sammy stood 5 feet 3 inches. He had a tall Swedish leading woman. It would seem odd, they thought. Sammy remained silent. He put in more training. His punches became hazy as he rehearsed boxing scenarios. He insisted on lighting so that his shadow covered the entire stage. Before the show ever opened, it was sold out. He was nominated for a Tony. He was described as the town's smallest heavyweight in one assessment. At one point, hotels in Las Vegas wouldn't let him stay there. Everything had altered by 1968. Every night he was earning $35,000. According to his contracts, the audience needed to be incorporated. He was obliged to remain in the finest suite. He was no longer subject to rejection. His power had grown to that extent. He put out more than 50 albums. In June 1972, his song The Candyman peaked at #1 on the Billboard charts. He appeared in 38 movies. He received Tony, Grammy, and Emmy nominations. The Kennedy Center recognized him in 1987. He raised roughly $750,000 for Martin Luther King's group in 1965, only 1 year. That's more than most celebrities are built to do. At no point was James Cagney 5'9". No matter what the studio claimed, his Army record said he was 5'5", and his biographers agreed. That made him 4 inches shorter than the average American man in his time. In the 1920s and 30s, that kind of thing mattered. Leading men were supposed to look big. They were supposed to tower over the villain, the girl, and sometimes even the camera. But Cagney, he had to be filmed from the knees up. Sometimes he stood on crates. Sometimes he only acted next to shorter actresses. And even then, people were told he was taller than he really was. The newspapers printed the lie like it was fact. Meanwhile, Cagney laughed about it. He once joked that he had to jump just to reach his own punchlines. But the truth is, none of it ever held him back, turned his small frame into pure force. When he moved on screen, he charged. In The Public Enemy from 1931, he slammed a grapefruit into Mae Clark's face, then stormed around the room like a coiled spring. You couldn't take your eyes off him. That energy wasn't just for movies. In real life, he took on studio bosses, too. In 1936, he climbed onto a studio golf cart so he could look Jack Warner in the eye. Warner was 6 feet tall. Cagney was demanding equal pay with Edward G. Robinson. Got it. Directors learned fast that Cagney's size wasn't a problem. It was part of the power. Raoul Walsh even built a whole ending around it. In White Heat, Cagney runs through an oil refinery, climbing ladders and sprinting across catwalks while explosions go off behind him. The camera follows him every step, ducking and weaving to keep up. No tall actor could have pulled it off without hitting the ceiling. The budget was over $1.3 million. The movie made all of it back in 6 weeks. Even when he played real people, the height never got in the way. In Yankee Doodle Dandy, he played George M. Cohan, who was actually 5'6". Cagney was an inch shorter, so the dance numbers were changed. His tap routines were sharper, tighter, faster. Some critics still talk about the way those steps hit like a machine gun. It became the movie's signature. By 1999, the American Film Institute ranked him the 8th greatest male star of the classic era. Nobody cared about his height anymore. It had become just a small detail. Edward G. Robinson. Edward G. Robinson was just 5'5". He didn't look like a Hollywood star. He didn't even speak English when he first arrived in New York. He was 10 years old, fresh off the boat from Bucharest. And the only languages he knew were Yiddish and Romanian. He wasn't handsome. He wasn't tall. And when he stood on a Broadway stage, no one thought leading man. Casting directors saw a short kid with a round face, but Robinson turned what looked like a weakness into a weapon. He stood in front of mirrors for hours, practicing the way his lips curled, how his eyebrows dropped, how his voice hit like a hammer. When people laughed at the idea of a tiny gangster, he barked back with a voice that filled the room. Then came Little Caesar. The date was January 9th, 1931. Robinson played Rico Bandello, a ruthless mob boss. And something strange happened. Audiences didn't care how short he was. He owned every scene. He didn't need to stand taller than the other actors. His presence made them smaller. Time magazine said his 5'5" frame fills the screen with menace. That was no exaggeration. Warner Brothers got nervous. They thought theaters might not buy a crime boss who had to look up at everyone. So they faked his height. The studio said he was 5'9". They shot him from low angles. They made taller actors slouch or sit on stools. But the numbers told the real story. Little Caesar cost about $280,000. It made more than $1.5 million in the middle of the Great Depression. Robinson didn't just prove them wrong, he rewrote the rules. By 1933, Robinson was earning $85,000 per film. That's close to $2 million today. And he didn't just get a paycheck, he got something rare, script approval. That was usually reserved for stars like Clark Gable, but Robinson had earned it, one scene at a time. Off-screen, his size became part of the story, too. During World War II, he volunteered for dangerous frontline USO tours. When asked why, he joked that a 5'5" target gives the Nazis half the chance. Behind the joke was something real. He was brave and he didn't stop giving. Over the years, he donated more than $250,000 to anti-fascist causes. He also built an art collection worth $3.5 million by 1956. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin was only 5 feet 5 inches tall. That made him 4 inches shorter than the average American man in the 1920s. Back then, people thought movie stars had to be tall and commanding on screen, but Chaplin didn't care. He turned that idea upside down. He created a look that made him even smaller. Huge trousers, a coat that was too tight, a little hat, a thin cane. This made him look like a child in grown-up clothes. But when he started moving, everything changed. He ran, spun, tripped, and danced with wild energy. In The Kid, he ran beside tall policemen, yet the camera couldn't look away from him. Made the audience forget his size. Directors had to pull the camera back just to fit him in frame. That short height became a secret weapon. In 1923, he earned $125 million for A Woman of Paris. That was 5 times more than Douglas Fairbanks, who stood at 5'9". Chaplin's popularity was unparalleled, and bizarre things were revealed in studio memos behind the scenes. Because of his diminutive size, the camera required less film to completely catch him. This minor detail contributed to a 12% reduction in production costs. People also felt more intimate with him because of his size. Something unexpected was discovered in a 1925 Columbia University investigation. People's bodies responded more when they saw Easy Street. When Chaplin was grabbed by the collar by a tall bully, a 38 peepstief, 38% rise in stress was detected by skin sensors. The audience felt guarded. They wished for his victory. Chaplin was aware of this. He fought a fighter with a far longer reach under city lights. Chaplin fought with deft movement rather than brute force. He avoided blows as if it were a dance. The audience adored it. Despite the advent of sound in movies, his quiet performance received a lot of attention. Off-screen, he was equally intelligent. He was a founding member of United Artists in 1919. Douglas Fairbanks, D.W., and Mary Pickford were seated at the same table as him. Griffith. Everybody received an equal portion. Chaplin made a statement at their first meeting that stuck with the business. Creative control is more important than physical inches. His wealth had increased to more than $50 million by 1952. That's more than $590 million if we take today's value into account. His impact persisted even after he left the U.S. during the Blacklist era. Despite his diminutive stature, his shadow was felt all across the world. Keaton Buster. The majority of stars in those days were tall, powerful, and noisy. None of those applied to Buster Keaton. His height was a mere 5 feet and 5 inches. Nevertheless, he managed to become one of the most well-known figures in silent film history. 1895 was his birth year. Joseph Frank Keaton was his true name. His father included him in their vaudeville act when he was a little lad. It wasn't a charming father-son performance, though. He was practically thrown around the stage by his father. In order to swing Buster like luggage, he had a suitcase handle stitched into the rear of his costume. Although it appeared cruel, Buster learned to fall that way. Without getting wounded, off rooftops, off stages, and off staircases, he acquired the ability to land on his side and twist in midair. How to always keep his head safe. The magic started there. He transitioned from stage to screen in 1917. All of that agonizing practice suddenly had a new goal. In fact, his diminutive stature worked to his advantage. He was more stable than taller actors, since his center of gravity was around 85 centimeters from the ground. According to a professor of physics, Keaton could withstand blows that would knock someone down 6 feet tall, because it was 10–12% more difficult to topple his body. Keaton also made good use of that gift. No one else would even attempt the stunts he performed. He clings to the waterspout of a train in Sherlock Jr., 1924. He is thrown to the tracks after being doused with 2,000 liters of water. Nobody was aware that it had broken a bone in his neck. Unaware of the break, he continued to shoot, until 11 years later, when physicians discovered it on an X-ray. His most perilous moment wasn't even that. The front of a 4,000-pound structure falls directly at him in Steamboat Bill Jr., 1928. It's only 3 inches from his head. Only by meticulously marking a precise location on the ground the previous evening and standing on it without flinching did he manage to survive. Hollywood finally took notice by 1927. His weekly income was $3,500. In today's currency, that would be almost $60,000. He even had a studio of his own. People continued to make jokes about his height, though. Huge Civil War troops stood next to him in the General, 1926, as if he were a forlorn drummer kid. To make him appear even smaller, players in our hospitality wore stilts. Keaton leaned into it rather than become angry. He remained unflappable throughout it all. His face remained the same. That blank expression became his signature even in the midst of mayhem. He was known as the Great Stone Face. Then there was sound. His films were taken over by MGM in 1928. He was no longer free. His career came to an end. However, something unexpected occurred in the 1950s. He returned to TV. He made an appearance on Twilight Zone. In 1957, he appeared in a beer commercial. Those who had been raised in a peaceful post-war society observed this odd tiny man drop objects with a grace they had never experienced before. Peter Lorre, stood just 5'5". It didn't matter if other people said it was even shorter. He felt huge on film. His size would be forgotten as you watched him. He portrayed a child killer in M in 1931. The intense lighting caused his face to perspire. His eyes leapt like something untamed and imprisoned. The image stuck in people's imaginations. Some Berliners called the police because they believed they saw him on the street. In just 3 months, it helped sell almost 400,000 more tickets by creating panic. In 1933, he departed Germany. He immediately caught Alfred Hitchcock's attention. Height didn't matter to Hitchcock. Energy was important to him, and Peter Lorre had it. He mingled with the people and the man who knew too much, but the camera caught him. His appearance served as a warning. The studios experimented with the contrast when he arrived in Hollywood. They created posters of Little Pete on Sydney Green Street next to 6FT4. People adored it. Variety was informed by theaters that ticket sales increased by 22% when both actors appeared in a film. Lorre leaned into his little frame rather than shrinking away from it. He received more than 300 job offers between the ages of 27 and 40. Many made over $3,000 each week. That is equivalent to $55,000 each week in current currency. By 1946, he had top billing because to his Warner Brothers contract. For actors under 5FT6 yen, that seldom ever occurred. However, he merited it. He wasn't merely acting. The screen was plagued by him. The New York Times expressed it best when he passed away in 1964. They described him as a short, plump man who yet had the ability to dominate every scene with his unique brand of evil. Meredith Burgess. Meredith was 5 feet 5 inches tall. His voice filled rooms, although he was neither tall nor ostentatious. The director believed he was too little to compete with a tall co-star on stage in 1935. Therefore, he instructed Burgess to project as though he were yelling across Times Square. Burgess did. His shout shook the theater and struck the back wall. He received 29 curtain calls from the audience on opening night. Noise like that attracts attention. Hollywood quickly started knocking. He received $25,000 for his very first deal. Today, that is over $550,000. He never had the appearance of a main man, therefore he improved. The odd one out, the underdog. His performance in 1939's Of Mice and Men was genuine and desperate. He was the tallest man on screen that evening, according to critics. He provided entertainment for soldiers in North Africa during World War II. In order to be seen by 8,000 people, he once perched atop an ammunition crate. Ernie Pyle, a war correspondent, saw his talent and chose him to play the lead in the GI story. Joe. He was awarded Best Actor by the National Board of Review for that performance. Politics struck him severely in 1951. Despite being blacklisted, he adjusted. No one could see how tall he was on the radio. To stay alive, he recorded almost 3,000 performances and advertisements. He transformed his shortness into power when TV opened up new opportunities. With his top hat and shoes, he looked larger than life as the Penguin in Batman. Children were enamored. He received a 6-figure royalty check and a pile of fan letters for that role. Rocky then arrived. He was 68. You will eat lightning and poo thunder as Mickey, the sulky trainer who barked. Just that line made movie history. The movie only cost $1 million to make. Burgess received an Oscar nomination, and the film brought in $225 million. Lou Costello stood at a mere 5 feet and 5 inches. That typically meant no chance of becoming a leading guy in Hollywood in the 1930s. Nevertheless, Lew used his height as his greatest asset with Bud Abbott rather than allowing it to deter him, who was 6 feet tall. Lew leaned toward it, looking like a roly-poly, wide-eyed child. The focal point of their performance was the contrast between the short and tall men. Lew wore tight outfits, talked in a high-pitched voice, and spun around frantically, saying, "Hey, Abbott!" It was humorous to look at, humorous to hear, and effective. Their movie Buck Privates earned more than $10 million by 1941. Making it had only cost $180,000. That represents a return of over 400%. People yelled instead of merely laughing. Lew wasn't just being amusing. He was forced to be more inventive by his size. He improved his ability to trip, fall harder, and add drama to everything. He wasn't weak, but a stumble from someone as small as him always looked worse and always elicited a larger chuckle. In his hometown of Paterson, New Jersey, young boxer Lou Costello, formerly known as Lou King, had an amateur record of 11 victories, 0 defeats, and 1 draw. He also took home 2 victories in the city's basketball free throw competition. Shooting from a full foot below the typical height helped achieve that. He also worked as a stuntman in the 1920s because of his lightning-fast reactions. Few comedians were able to develop their own jokes and execute their own routines. Lew could. Even his economic dealings were influenced by his height. Lew gestured to himself when Abbott demanded a larger portion of the compensation in 1936, saying, "Pay to see the little guy squirm." Lew received 60% of the income by 1941. Lew scaled bar counters and tanks during their 1942 wartime tour to sell war bonds, only to make him visible to those in the rear. Bonds worth $85 million were sold on that trip. That was sufficient to finance a whole set of aircraft carriers. Lou Costello was earning $250,000 each film by the mid-1940s. That's around $4 million in today's currency, but his humor didn't shield him from suffering. Lew received a call on November 4, 1943, right before he was set to go live on NBC. Lew Jr., his infant son, drowned in their backyard swimming pool. The performance was about to begin. Nevertheless, Lew took the stage. He did the entire Who's On First charade flawlessly. The crowd was unaware of what had just transpired. However, he started crying as the lights went out and the mic stopped talking. His reputation was altered by the incident. He had changed from being the short, dumb one. He was powerful. In public, Alan Ladd claimed to be 5 feet 6 inches tall. But behind closed doors, individuals claimed that he was truly 5'5". Studio records show that between 1943 and 1956, he ordered 2 pairs of special 2-inch elevator shoes every 6 months. The studio paid for them and called it wardrobe maintenance. Why? Because Ladd's big break came in this Gun for Hire in 1942. He played a calm, cold contract killer. His co-star was Veronica Lake. She was just 4'11". They resembled statues when paired together, but they were smaller. Because of how well that appearance worked, Paramount even included a stipulation in his 1944-1949 contract. Unless the studio had agreed beforehand to dig trenches or erect platforms, all the women he acted with had to be 5 feet 4 or shorter. Things became crazy. In order for Van Heflin, who was 6 feet tall, to walk lower than Ladd, the director of Shane in 1951 ordered real trenches to be built.